All right, welcome back to another Luke Humphrey running podcast. This is Luke Humphrey, and we are going to do part 7 of our first marathon series today. So we're going to talk about the race itself. So we've talked about pretty much everything else to this point, and now it's time to get you through the actual race. So it's finally here. It's race day, and much like the taper, now should really be a time where you feel rewarded, right? So this is the reason why you did all that hard work for weeks and months. And so now it's time to cash the checks, as we say. Um, but the thing is, a lot of times people put a lot of pressure on themselves, and which is fair, and I think I actually don't mind that, because if you're worried about the race and you are putting pressure on yourself, then to me it shows that you're respecting the distance, right? That you're a little bit of fear can go a long ways with how well you perform. The problem becomes when you get so anxious that you just kind of put yourself in a state of uh, inability to recover from it, and you can't, and it just really affects performance overall. So I want to talk about some things today where you can kind of ease that pressure off of yourself, and take advantage of the situation, and really be able to be in a position where you are maybe a little fearful, but you're not so anxious that you talk yourself out of doing a good job. Um, so I put together my top things that people should really consider during the race, and how to approach those. So the first one, and you get this all the time, you get this with people who've run marathons before too, but the idea of following a pace group. You go sign up, you can pick a time, and ideally you have a bunch of people to run with, which will help you succeed in reaching your goal time. And to be honest with you, I'm always on the fence about pace groups, and you have to be careful, because people listen to this might be part of pace groups. They might have paced a lot of people, and I think for the most part pace groups are a great thing, and you have to always be gracious, because you have one or more people that are willing to run at a certain pace, so that you don't have to think about it, and pull you through the entire 26.2 miles. So that's a very gracious thing for somebody to offer to do. But like with anything, all pacers are not created equal, and I've seen a lot of times where a pacer will try to put time in the bank, and it really just doesn't work out. It's easy for them, because let's say you have a person that is volunteering to run a 4-hour pace group, which means they've probably run significantly faster than 4 hours, and so they can go out a little bit faster, because it's not overextending themselves from a pace wise early on. And they might say, well, we're don't worry about it, we're putting time in the bank. Well, they will fade back to 4 hours, and it won't affect them very much. But you going out too fast is already pushing you beyond what you're capable of doing, and you didn't even know if you were going to be able to run that 4 hours to begin with. So if you go out at 3:45 pace and you're doing that for the first 6-8 miles, that's a lot more stressful on you than it is the person that's doing the pacing. So they can they have the wiggle room to go back and forth, where you probably don't have that luxury. And so putting time in the bank early on is no big deal for them, but for you it might be a big deal. And so then that's when you see a lot of people start falling off the last 6 to 10 miles of the marathon, when people do that. So or you'll see, the other problem I see too is, since it is, so again, using a 4-hour example, if a person's run 4 hour, or run 3.5 hours for the marathon, and they're pacing for the 4 hours, they might not have the rhythm for the 4 hours, because that might be slow enough to them where they have to kind of really think about what they're doing. They can't just run a natural pace. And so they're always kind of bouncing back and forth between, maybe 10, 15 seconds fast, and then they come back and they're 10, 15 seconds slow. And so the average is there, but you're kind of yo-yoing back and forth all over the place. So I think you have to be careful of that. Now, with that being said, if you have enough faith in your ability, which I think in the age of having a GPS and all this other technology, that, if you take your watch and say you want to run, 8-minute miles, and you set your watch to give you, 750 to 810 range, something like that, and you're staying in that range, and yet the group is going way in front of you, you don't have to worry about it. No, because you have one, we've trained to teach you how to learn what pace feels like, and two, you have the technology backing that up for you, so you can trust yourself and say, okay, they're too fast, I can back off. But later on, when they're starting to come back, you're still feeling pretty good, and those people that, air quotes, time in the bank, are fading back, and they're taking all those deposits out of what they or all those withdrawals out of what they deposited in. You're able to catch them and blow by them, and you can actually use them as kind of the carrot, in front of you, where you can try to chase those guys down in the last 6 to 10 miles where they're fading, but you might be feeling like you're hurting a little bit, but having that motivation and being able to actually maintain pace and be catching people is a lot more of a positive experience than fading back and watching people go by you. So that's where it can still be, at the end of the day, it's still a good situation for you. You just have to trust how you're feeling and what your data is telling you back with your watch and everything like that. So if you're running the pace you should be and they're way in front of you, don't worry about it, because they're going to be coming back. Especially the pacer's job is to run that pace, so they're going to have to come back at some point, or they've really screwed up a lot of people's races, and that's not going to look good for them. That's probably the last time that they'll be pacing. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about signing up for pace groups. And I guess the other thing to go with that would be, if you're in between pace groups, say there's a 350 group and a 4-hour group, and you want to run, under 4 hours, like 355 or something, do you go out with that 350 group? No, I don't think you go out with that 350 group. I think you start with a 4-hour group to force yourself to go out conservative, and then gradually pick it up across the rest of the race. But I think that you always want to put yourself in a position where you're going to be a little bit more conservative at the start. Because the thing about 26 miles is, if you're 10 or 15 seconds slow the first few miles, you still have 23 miles to make that up. And that's only, a few seconds a mile at that point. That's not something where you all of a sudden have to panic and be running 20 seconds a mile faster to make up for being, 10, 15 seconds slow over the first couple of miles. You have a long ways to make that up. And the longer you have, the less that you have to make up per mile. And that puts you in a much better position. All right, so another question I get is if they should warm up or not. And ultimately, you don't want to start any race, cold, but you have to be conservative with your fuel stores too. So you don't want to waste 400 or 500 calories on a warm up where you're going to be in a race where it's going to be hard enough to maintain the calories that you need anyway. So you really have to balance it. So in Hanson's first marathon, stepping up to 26.2, the Hanson's way, I go into really specific ideas with this based on time goals and things like that. But the basic idea is, the faster you are, the more thought you want to put into a warm up. So in general, I would say that you'd want at least some sort of dynamic warm up. The leg swings and things like that that we've talked about a number of times. Leg swings, body weight squats, lunges, arm swings, arm circles, things like that, rotational exercises, just to get loosened up, get your range of motion going, and you're raising your heart rate a little bit. So the whole idea of a warm up is to bridge from being, you're thinking about going 0 to 60, right? Well, we want to bridge that gap. We want to make it more like going from 0 to 60 to going from 30 to 60, right? So we're not trying to bridge that whole gap at the start of the race. We're trying to do a warm up where we're elevated, we're ready to run a little bit, so that we don't have that initial shock of all of a sudden just going into running. And why I said, it depends on how fast you are, is because if you're a competitive runner and you're running, 3 hours, 2:45, 2:30 faster, your intensity level is going to be really high. So it's almost like, you're getting ready to race, right? So you have to be in a position where you can run pretty hard from the start. Whereas if you're running 4 or 5 hours, there's not a big difference between, your easy pace and your marathon pace. You know, a lot of you probably run your easy pace faster than your marathon pace. You know, so so you have to keep that in mind. We're not trying to that bridge that we're trying to gap doesn't have to be as big, right? So that's why there's such a range in how much you should warm up. If you're really looking to compete, I would recommend more than doing the body weight squats, like something like 10 minutes of jogging, dynamic warm up, stride. And the thing is too, the practicality of what you're doing, where you're at and what race you're at and things like that is really going to dictate what you have the opportunity to do too. You know, those waiting around in a corral, I think of Chicago all the time, like or even New York, where it's like, you know, we walk in the elite field, we're in a tent on the other side of the start line. We walk back to the starting line and you just see 2 levels of bridge just filled with people. And you're thinking, how long does it take for those people to get across the starting line? So if you're doing a warm up and then it's going to be 20 minutes before you even cross the starting line, then you have to weigh where you're actually doing. So your warm up might actually be just the walk from your corral up to the starting line, and that really might be all you have the opportunity to do. Now, if you know that's true and you're waiting in the corral and you kind of know as you're moving up, like you can do the body weight squats, the lunges, and those things as you're moving up, and then the last little bit is just your walk into the starting line, and then it's really, as most of you know who are in those corrals, you know, it's a couple miles of fighting through people anyway, so you're probably going to start out a little bit slower. So in reality, that first mile or two might actually be your warm up. So with that said, you know, your first 2 miles, if you're 30 seconds mile slow, don't panic. You're, even like I said before, if you're a minute slow at 2 miles in, you still have 24 miles to make that up, and that's more than doable. You don't want to be in a position where you're at 20 miles and you got 2 minutes to make up. That's a lot trickier situation to ask for. But if you're a little bit slow on the first few miles, that's not a bad position. I'd rather see you be a minute slow than a couple minutes fast early on, because that's where putting the time in the bank is really going to be detrimental. And I would say this too. I didn't really write this in my original notes, but I think you know, when you think about that and people are talking about putting time in the bank, it's just don't let anybody tell you to put time in the bank. And I'll tell you this from my experience. My first marathon, you know, I was naive and I thought, you know, I got to like 16, 18 miles and I'm like, I got this in the bag. Started picking it up, and my original goal was around like 5:20 pace. Then all of a sudden I'm running 5:10s, 5:05s for the next 3 or 4 miles, and then I get to 23, and it's like, oh, this is what they're talking about. And you literally, so I put 45 seconds in the bank, those 3 or 4 miles, but I lost all of it plus 2 minutes, you know, in the last 3 miles. So like literally with 5K to go, I'm on, you know, 2 hours and, you know, 15, 16 minute pace. And here I am with 3 miles to go, and I lost 2.5 minutes those last 5K. I ended up running 2:18, you know, 49 or something like that. So you might put seconds in the bank, but I guarantee you, if it's over your head a little bit, you're going to lose minutes per mile the last, you know, 5K, 10K, maybe even a little bit more. Some people might be the last 8 miles that they're losing minutes per mile. And then all of a sudden you saw a major time goal that you were going to be able to hit just, you know, go by the wayside. And so you really don't want to put yourself in that position. So the next thing I have is having a fuel plan and executing that fuel plan. I think this is crucial. You know, the earlier you learn this in a marathon career, you're going to be so far ahead of the curve, because I see so many people really kind of put nutrition on the back burner, especially on race day, and it costs them dearly. You know, so at this point, and the thing is, we've talked about training, how you need to be practicing with it. And it's not so that and part of it's so that your workouts go better, but most of it is for this day, right? So that you know how to take in gels, you know how to take in calories, you know how to drink fluids while running marathon pace, or when your stomach doesn't feel the greatest, and knowing that you can still take it in and it's going to be okay, right? So that's the big reason why we're doing a lot of this. So it's not necessarily for the workout itself, but it's for to practice what you're going to do on race day. Because if you're comfortable with it in training, you're going to be a lot more comfortable with it on race day. And then if you're more comfortable with it, you're more likely to stick with the plan. And again, I mean, you're talking about if you skip this stuff early on, just to make up a few seconds in a mile, you're going to pay for it by losing minutes per mile. And you complement, poor nutrition during the race with going out too fast, and that's a recipe for disaster. It's going to be honest with you, it's going to be a pretty miserable experience, and you don't want that. So you've got to be familiar with what you're going to use, and if you're just going to rely on what the race is going to provide, you have to be practicing with what the race is going to be providing. You might have all these great ambassador deals with whoever, but if that's not what you're going to use on race day, you need to practice with what you're going to use on race day. When I first, and for the races standpoint, races have come a long way. I started marathons in 2004, so we're talking roughly 15 years ago, and since then, we've seen record numbers of participants in marathons, which is great, and I think races have learned along the way where, whenever I ran a race early on in my career, it was always like there was a gel station between 18 and 20 miles, and that was it. You'd have your fluid stations and stuff like that, but no gel stations. And now you're seeing more and more gel stations earlier on in races. And so I think that's a great thing. The earlier, the better you're taking those calories in. Because think about how, when you're racing, it's going to feel pretty easy early on, ideally. And so you're going to be a lot more likely to want to take calories in. So another reason to start early is because it's going to feel easier to do it. And then you get to 18, 20 miles, you might not feel like taking those calories, and you might be thinking, oh my gosh, just get me through. But if you still take in just a little bit later on, even if it's not as much, one, you've got the calories that you've been able to use from early on. Those are going to help and push you forward. But then there's the thing of carbo rinsing and things like that, where even just kind of the taste of carbohydrate late in a race can kind of trick your brain to saying that it's gotten carbohydrates, and then you can get a little more mental clarity, you can maintain pace a little bit longer, things like that. So earlier the better, so that if you do falter later on, it might not be as detrimental. So really focus on early nutrition, stick to that schedule early on. So like if you've listened to anything I've written or anything I've talked about or read anything I've written, I really advocate 15 minutes before the race, and then within the next 30 minutes of the start of the race, and then every 30 to 45 minutes. I really, really believe that. And that might mean taking 4, 5, 6 gels, but it is going to be worth it for you. Because one thing is you have more than enough fat stores to provide energy, but the complication with that is that most people have to slow down to use those fat stores. And if the carbohydrate isn't there, one, you're not going to be able to maintain a certain level of intensity, and two, your body's going to it's going to affect your mind. Carbohydrate is a primary fuel source for brain and central nervous system function, and most of that's coming from the liver. So if you don't have the carbohydrate and you're not providing the liver with the carbohydrate from taking in gels, which is going to be the first place it goes to, then you're gonna get that mental fog. It's going to be harder to think. It's going to be harder to kind of dig down mentally and maintain that pace and force yourself to maintaining an effort that's going to, be high and hopefully maintain that pace for you. So you really have to make sure that you're taking in those carbohydrates. All right, so that pretty much covers that. Other than just reemphasize practice with what you're going to be using and at the intervals you're going to be using. All right, so lastly, I want to talk about the strategy itself. And originally, I was going to combine. I was going to do strategy, and another point I was going to make was that expect things to get really hard, but I think they kind of go hand in hand, and they really should be talked about at the same time. So, I always like the idea of starting big when you talk about race strategy, and then working small in a marathon. So otherwise, if we think about the whole thing at once, we tend to scare the heck out of ourselves. And what I mean by that is again, I'll use myself as an example. So if I look at a race, especially when I was going to go after a big PR, and you're looking at the pace you have to run, and you're just thinking, wow, there's literally no way I can run that for 26.2 miles. And it would scare you, right? And so it's very easy to talk yourself out of being able to handle that pace. And so what I would do is I would start with as big a number as I possibly could, and I'd work back. I'd work the 26.2 back to a distance I knew I could handle. And so we did the infamous simulator all the time. That was always our marquee workout. And so that would be a good place to start. So I knew I could get up to 16 miles at that pace. So I would assume, assuming my simulator went well, which usually did, I would say, okay, I know I can run 16 miles at that pace, no problem. And then I would analyze how I felt on that day. And, I would always be like, okay, well, I could get to 2 to 3 more miles. I could probably, on that day that I ran the simulator, I could run 2 to 3 more miles. So that puts me at about 19 miles. And then you think about how much the taper is going to add on that. So I'm like, okay, I ran the simulator tired. For me, I was usually in the middle of a 120 to 150 mile week. Pretty tired at that kind of mileage. And you guys are pretty tired at the mileage you guys are running. And so I think, okay, I go into this, I'm rested. I'm racing. I'm going to have the adrenaline from the race. I'm going to have, I'm going to feel, it's going to be mentally, a little bit easier to go a little bit further. So now I can add another 2 to 3 miles on top of that. And so I would say I probably could get to anywhere from 23 to 24 miles, right? And then I couldn't really account for the last 2 miles. So then I knew that's where having the grit, nutrition, and just being plain old mentally tough was going to get me through. And how bad did I want to succeed at my goal? That was going to be where that really came into play, would be that last 2 miles to 5K of the race. And so that leads me to the last part of that is it's going to get tough. Expect it to get tough and accept that it's going to be really, really hard. Those last few miles are going to take a lot of mental fortitude. And I stole that from my college track coach, Jim Knapp. If you know what is going to happen though, and you know it's going to happen to everybody, then it makes it a lot easier to deal with. And you've heard people say, embrace the suck or accept the pain. It ultimately you really do. If the more you fight it, the more it's going to kind of punch you back in the face. But if you just kind of accept that it's going to be there, and so when it does happen, you're like, okay, I was ready for you. I knew you were coming. I knew you were going to show your face, and I'm ready for you. And so then you can really kind of you can really deal with it a little bit better. You can still kind of relax and not fight it, because when you fight it, you get tense, and that only makes things worse. So if you can accept it and just kind of breathe it out and just kind of relax, it still kind of keep your shoulders and your stride relaxed a little bit, you can deal with things a lot better. And you might slow down a little bit, but you're not going to slow down the minutes per mile. You're still going to be in a position where you can fight mentally, because that's where a lot of it too is. At that point, if you've done well with your nutrition, you were good with your pacing, you didn't overextend yourself by going out too fast, mentally you're going to be a little bit clearer. And being a little bit clearer mentally is going to allow you to buckle down and really grind it out and still fight. Really put yourself in a position where you can fight. You're going to, this might be in a position where you say, I see the next stoplight. That's all you focus on. Get to that next stoplight. It might be that pace group that you've been chasing down. Might be able to see that little sign poking up in a bunch of runners. That's your motivation. But mentally, you're going to be in a position where you can put your laser focus on that and just say, okay, I'm catching those guys, and let the body will follow the mind at that point. You can really kind of grind it out and be in a position to fight. Otherwise, if you're not in that position, you're mentally, I wouldn't say you give up. It's not a conscious effort, but it's definitely a subconscious thing where you just kind of back it off. You allow yourself mentally to back it off. You're like, okay, I'll wait. I just can't do it. And then that's when sometimes you see the people who really kick it in, because then all of a sudden they see the finish line. They're like, oh, I can go now. And then they let it rip the last quarter mile or whatever, where you being in a position, you're going to be able to maintain that effort and really maybe buckle down. And then when you see the finish line, maybe you pick it up and find another gear still and really reach your goal there. So I think the big thing is you can't be too aggressive early on. You have to be on with your nutrition and then break it down. So earlier when I was talking about that first 16 miles, how I would really approach that 16 miles would be like finding a group that was within really close to my pace range, right? So if I was looking to run, using myself an example, so if I was looking to run 5:10s, ideally there would be a group of, a few people that were running that pace, and you could tuck in, you could kind of just zone out, because it's really, really hard to put that much concentration into that big amount of time. I couldn't do it for 2 hours, so I can't imagine somebody being able to do it for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. So you want to delay the amount of time that you really have to buckle down mentally. Because if you buckle down mentally too early, then you get fatigued that way too, and then you just can't concentrate, right? So all those metabolic and physiological, and just the fact that you're at 23 miles, you're just like, oh, I can't do this anymore. But if you've been in a position where that you've been able to put it off for a big chunk of the time, and you've just been able to kind of zone out, then when it is time to focus, you're in a much better position to be able to kind of flip that switch and buckle down, chase those people down, chase those times down, be able to look at your watches and be like, okay, here we go. I can do this now. And that's such a great feeling. Like, even though it hurts, and don't get me wrong, it's still going to hurt, but you're going to be able to deal with it a lot better. And that's one of the, honestly guys, that's one of the greatest feelings I've ever had in races. Like, knew it felt tough, but my body hurt, but I felt tougher, if that makes sense. Like, physically I felt hurt, but mentally I was like, okay, we're doing this. We're going to work. I see those guys there. I'm chasing them down. And I can think of, like, Chicago Marathon would be a perfect example, because, thinking about it, I'm running with 40,000 people, but at the elite level, late in the race, a lot of times you just find yourself alone. And it's really kind of eerie. And there would be literally times where I didn't see a group of people in front of me for miles. And then all of a sudden you make that left-hand turn onto Michigan Avenue, and it's like, there's a group of people. All of a sudden I can see a group of people. You can't tell, like, that just automatically just perked me up. And it's like, okay. Because at that point you have about 2 miles to go to the race. And that, you guys don't know, I've run Chicago so many times, it's not even funny. That would pick me up every time. Like, it would just be like, okay, here we go. Now we can start chasing people down. And it would save, and I would be hurting. Like, up until that point, I'd be like, oh my God, I don't want to do this anymore. This hurts so bad. You turn that corner, see those people, it's like, boom, automatically a switch just would go off. And all of a sudden you go back into the competitive mode, and you're able to do it, but if you've handled a lot of things wrong with nutrition and pace, you just can't get into that mental. You just mentally and physically can't get back into that mindset, and it makes it really, really tough. So just keep that in mind. Know that it's going to hurt. Break it down, and don't. And the other thing I'd say too is, when you get to that point, if you get to that 22, 23 mile mark, don't think of it as I still have 3 miles to go. Think of it as, all right, guys, I've done 23 miles of this. I'm on it. I can do it. If you always have to look at it as what I've done, not what I still have to go. If you think about it in that term, and it can hit you weird times too. Like, it might hit you at 16 miles, like, oh my God, I still have 10 miles to go. Think about, okay, I've already got 16 miles in. Boom, boom, boom. Don't always think about what you've done, now how far you have left to go, and that'll help out a ton. Okay, so a lot of negative in that last, I know, but I think it's really key for you to know that it's going to be hard. And I think people go into it and know it's going to be hard, but so many times, like, I saw a post on the Facebook group, like, oh, this plan doesn't mentally prepare you for your first marathon. Like, it's one of those things where I don't think you can prepare mentally for it. I think it's one of those things where you actually just have to do it to know what it's going to feel like. Because you can run a 5K and it hurts like heck, right? Your quads hurt, your chest burning, it hurts, right? But you can pinpoint it because you're running really hard. But you get to the marathon and you get to the point where it's just like, mentally you can get foggy and just things don't feel right and you can't think clearly. And it's one of those things where you can't explain it. You have to just go through it. And all I can do is tell you that it's going to happen, and to know that at some point, probably between 18 and 22, 23 miles, it's probably going to happen. But I can tell you that it's going to be normal and you can fight through it. And that's where I think it's key to know. And if you know that and you take that to heart, I think your odds for success that last, because you guys don't know how many times I've seen races go great until 23 miles and then just fall apart. And so I think you really have to, the more you're aware that it's going to get really hard at some point, and you're going to want to maybe cry, you're going to maybe want to stop, but you can do it. I think knowing that is so key, because I guarantee you guys, once you cross that finish line, that sense of accomplishment is going to be so amazing, and it's going to be so overwhelming for a lot of you. It's going to be an incredible feeling, right? Like, it's, think about it, like 6 months before that day, you might have thought, man, there is no way that I'm going to be able to do this. And to go from that feeling of being like, there's no way I can do this, to having done it is going to be so unbelievably gratifying for yourself. And that nobody can take that away. You're a marathoner at that point, and that's something that nobody can take away from you. So I know that was a little bit negative there, but the flip side is when you finish and you gutted it out and you raced and you pushed yourself to the absolute maximum that you could, that's so worth it, right? It's so worth it to just know that you put that work in and you did it. To me, that's amazing. And I get that feeling too, even, 15 years later. It's like, I did it, and not a lot of people do it. And then you probably hate me for a week or two, and you'll say you're never going to do it again, and then you sign up for another one. So, and that's, you guys don't know how many people I've coached where they're like, I'm just going to do this once. It's my bucket list thing. And that was 15 marathons ago for them. So I always like to laugh when people tell me they're just going to run one. The bug will bite you, and then you'll be like, and then you'll forget the pain, and then you'll start training again. So, but that's race strategy, guys. I hope you guys got some information. I've actually got some really good feedback from people who run marathons. They said this was really good to go back to, which is great. So I thank you for that feedback. If you've liked this podcast, please, if you haven't already bought it, go take a look at Hanson's first marathon, stepping up to 26.2, the Hanson's Away. Obviously, you can purchase from me if you want at lukehumphrey.running.com, and obviously you can get it great prices online. Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, velopress.com, all those places will have it, and I appreciate it. And always check out more podcasts and stuff, lukehumphrey.running.com. Subscribe to this podcast. Leave me reviews, guys. Leave me some 5 stars and stuff too, because people have been asking for our app that we had up a few years ago, but nobody ever ranked it, and we kind of got some negative feedback. And they're like, "Where did it go?" It's like, well, nobody left any reviews, so I have to tell you to smash that like button. As they say, it was my kids watching the YouTube stuff. They're like, smash that like button. So smash that like button. But in any case, I hope this helps you get you through your first marathon. I hope this turns you into a marathoner. I hope this is a baseline for you, and we can teach you how to train and become the best runner that you possibly can. And ultimately, that's our goal with all this stuff, is to lay the foundation, to teach you how you can train, get faster, expect more out of yourself, and maximize your ability, whatever goals you might have. So as always, I appreciate you guys listening, and we'll start something else next time. Yeah, leave me ideas too. I have no problem with leaving me ideas. You can fill out a contact form on our website, lukehumphrey.running.com. And always looking for ideas. So thanks for listening, guys. I'll talk to you later. All right, bye-bye.